Hi, everybody. This is Nikki here with Genesis West Health Coaching based out of Quincy, California. We just had our very first free health seminar open to the public. And for those who weren't able to make it or might want to see the information again, I am posting it online for a limited time. And this month, we go over a different topic every month. This month, we went over food labeling and food packaging, understanding all the different things manufacturers can put on there, what it means, why they have it on there, and which ones actually matter. So super interesting. Let's get into it. Okay, so today's content. So what are we going to go over? We're going to start with why the heck it's important to understand packaging. Why do we need to know this stuff? We're going to break down all the different parts of a food label. We're going to go over the ingredient list and what that means. Explain the different certifications and labels you might find. And then end with some tips just to make things easier. And before starting, it might be helpful to have a packaged food with you, just for fun, even like a good and a bad example to compare as we go along, because we will be looking at the different parts. And then I did post online my food label cheat sheet that I had handed out at the seminar. You are very welcome to download or print one and use that as needed. So just a little bit about me. I do health coaching year round. Other than that, during the summer, I am the activities director at Greenhorn Ranch. And during the winter, I'm the recreation coordinator for Parks and Rec. You'll find me at Serpilio Hall. Outside of free seminars, I do a lot of one-on-one coaching, groups, corporate, everything from first responders to sports teams. Absolutely love it. After this seminar, if you have any questions about your own health, we can talk about, or anything I can do to be of service to you, to help you feel your best, please let me know. So I plan to cover a different topic every month. And if you do have suggestions for topics you'd like to hear about in the future, let me know, because I'm very open to suggestions. And over the course of the year, I hope you do start to see that you have more control over your own health than you probably think you do, and that your body is a beautiful temple of God that deserves to be taken care of, and you do have the ability to do that, especially through knowledge. Especially in our day and age, we have access to the internet and social media and so many other things, right? Honestly, there's almost too much information, and now it's coming to the point of having to weed through it all. So I hope this either clarifies or broadens for you, wherever you are at in your health journey. And as a disclaimer, I have to say this, please do keep in mind I am not a licensed doctor or a registered dietitian. Please do consult with your doctor before making any drastic changes to your diet. So as we go through food packaging today, there's a lot more we could go into that I'm going to talk about, but I just briefly want to cover the parts of it. I'm not going to tell you how much and what you should be eating. This is not the time or place for that. It's a very personal decision and something we can work on one-on-one. But because everybody is different, I can't just speak to everybody about that. So today is more about the red flags, what to look for, why things are there. And so the first thing we need to look at in understanding food packaging is why it's important in the first place. Like, where did these labels come from? Why did they pick the certain things that they chose to put on food packaging? So we're going to start with the history of food labels. It's a lot more interesting than it probably sounds, but it is a relatively new thing to require food labels on packaging. Only in 1990 is when it came to pass, which in the grand scheme of things is not that long ago. Congress passed this move through the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act. So now, thankfully, all packaged food must include certain nutrition information and ingredient information. But why did this come about? What prompted this change? And if you look at the history of processed food consumption in America, I don't have a chart here, and we kind of all know this, right? We're eating more and more packaged food, more and more processed food. And I have a little chart over here. This is an example of the standard American diet. Everything you see in orange on the left side, 63%. That's the amount of processed food that makes up the current average American diet. So we are increasingly eating more of these packaged foods, and probably will continue for a while at least. And so it's really important to know what's in them, because otherwise we would have no idea. If I gave you a banana, you could kind of look that up online. A banana is a banana. We could figure out the nutrition information on that banana. But if I gave you, I don't know, banana cake. Is banana cake a thing? No, banana bread. That's the word I'm looking for. If I give you banana bread, if it was from a box, you might have no idea what's in there or what is added, and that can become kind of problematic. So really important to label foods that have multiple items in them and don't come from a single natural source. But again, I'm not trying to convince anybody to not eat packaged foods per se. I will not tell you how to eat. but I will show you the benefits or the negatives of certain aspects. And so there is actually a lot of good that comes from packaged food. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been created, right? So what are some of these pros? We get a much longer shelf life. We get to reach more remote areas. We have greater availability with shipping. We can feed more people. It's fast. It's convenient. It's cheaper a lot of times. It's America, because we all live that fast and furious lifestyle now. But on the downside of that, there are plenty of cons to having packaged food. Because we have that longer shelf life, we're going to need more preservatives, certain additions like emulsifiers or anti-foam agents to make it package correctly or mix correctly. The information on the packaging can be misleading a lot of times or confusing, which is what we're going over today. And not everything legally has to be listed, so you truly don't 100% know what is in your packaged food. It's cool to think about food as being our first medicine. It's our first line of prevention against illness and chronic issues. And like medicine, food is just a product. It is an industry too. And companies who make that food, they want you to buy their product. They're going to try to make it as appealing as possible. And so it's up to us as consumers to make that decision and know where our dollar is going. So let's go through the different parts of a food label. I'm going to have an example on the screen if you want to follow along with whatever package you have with you. This is not a label for anything in particular. It's just an example, but it does give us a good breakdown. I'll be talking about all the different parts of the food label. All right, let's start with serving size. It is the very first thing at the very top of the label, and it's simply the amount of that product that constitutes a single serving. If it's something small like an energy bar, that might be the whole package. Or it might list the whole package next to a single serving. But for the most part, all the nutrition information is going to be based off of just that one serving. And it's important to realize that there's no USDA, FDA, there is no standard of any sort for what these serving sizes have to be. The companies, the manufacturers completely get to come up with this on their own. They might be comparable between similar products of different companies or different brands, but that company gets to decide how much do I want the American people to eat of my product. Because of this, serving size can be really tricky, and oftentimes they appear healthier when you kind of glance at them. Manufacturers, they purposely make them smaller than the typical consumer would eat in one sitting. They've researched it. They run tests. They absolutely know this. They know you're going to eat more than one tiny little serving. And let's look at this example of a Gatorade label. At first glance, it doesn't look that bad. We've only got 50 calories. We have 14 grams of sugar, which is not, super duper great, but it's not that bad either. And we think, okay, that's not that bad. But then if we look at the serving size, we see 2.5 servings per container. So if you want to reach this 14 grams, that means you better drink a third of this and then put it away for the rest of the day, which nobody's going to do. We're going to drink the whole thing, right? If we do that, we are actually consuming 35 grams of sugar, which is basically drinking a soda. And that's all because they snuck in that little servings per container trick right there. Moving on to calories is right below the serving size. Calories is simply a measure of energy. It's a way to measure energy. Not all calories are created equal, because the calorie count, that 280 right there, it doesn't tell you where those calories are coming from, which does matter. And I'm going to explain that in a second. I personally do not look at calories, because that number, it does not tell me really anything other than the amount of energy I have access to at some point. It doesn't even tell me when I'm going to have access to that energy. And it's important to know where those calories are coming from, which is the rest of the food label that we're going to get into. Your body metabolizes and stores things differently. So for example, if I ingest 300 calories from bread, which is a simple carb, it's going to get broken down really quickly and result in these short bursts of energy. And if you don't need that energy, it's going to get stored as body fat inevitably. And guess what? You're hungry soon after, because your body took in these calories, used it, but it's still craving protein to rebuild itself and vitamins and minerals for functions. And it's like, hey, we didn't get much else. We need to eat more. Let's compare that to 300 calories from like an avocado, which is healthy fats. Fats are a lot harder to break down. They take longer to metabolize, and they're going to leave you feeling fuller longer because of that. And oftentimes, a natural source like that is packaged with other beneficial nutrients you need to operate. You see how it's similar, same number of calories, but because it's coming from a different source, your body uses them very differently. There's a huge dogma in the United States, which I think many of us are aware of, on counting calories. Businesses make a ton of money selling this idea. And yeah, it's true. If in general you do consume more calories than you burn,
then eventual weight gain is going to be inevitable, but that still ignores where the calories are coming from. So if you ever heard the term empty calories, this means a product with high calories and not much else in terms of nutrients below it. So if you see, where the calories are listed, big number here, and as we get to the rest of the label, it's like 0%, 0, 0, 0, 0. That's an empty calorie. You're getting this short burst of energy and really not much else that your body needs. Beware of these low calorie labels. Again, this is a marketing trick to grab your eye, to subconsciously make you think that, oh, this product is a little bit better for me. There's no industry standard or universal data for what is considered a low calorie product. Oftentimes it's just two comparable products. They may be by the same brand or not, and one is technically lower calorie than the other. But that's like comparing two cartons of ice cream and one saying it's low calorie. Yeah, it might be lower than ice cream B, but they're both still really high calorie. And oftentimes making the serving sizes smaller, like we were looking at before with the Gatorade, is going to also reduce the calorie content. And I used to eat those 100 calorie snacks growing up, and it was like 5 chips or 5 cookies, but it was only 100 calories, but I had to eat like 4 of them to even start to feel anything. So, all right, we're going to move to the rest of the box, where it lists the percent daily values of several macronutrients, or things that we consume in larger amounts. We'll go through each of these separately. They're always going to be in the same order, which is super helpful. So important to remember that the nutrients we're going to go through, each one is based off a single serving, as long as that's what it says up here. If it's one serving size, the following is going to be based off of one serving, not the whole package. These serving sizes give us 2 bits of information. The first is an objective amount, which is something science can prove, right? It's just the weight of that nutrient in grams or milligrams. So if we look at saturated fat, 4.5 grams. It's hard to argue that, right? Like you can measure out 4.5 grams of saturated fat. The second bit of information it gives is the percent, the subjective amount. And I say subjective because there's no law of physics or anything saying that 4.5 grams is 23% of the total saturated fat we should have in a day. That was created by humans. That was a man-made number. So where did that number come from? If you look at the bottom of the label, you'll always see a disclaimer. And it says something like, the recommended daily values have been set by the FDA based on a 2,000 calorie daily goal, blah, blah, blah. The FDA set this 2,000 calorie guideline for Americans back in 1990 as well. It was founded with good intention, to be honest. They did a lot of studies. They found how much Americans were eating at the time and of what, how many calories. And so they set this 2,000 mark below what the actual American was consuming in a day in attempts to curb our obesity rate, which hasn't worked super great so far. As we're learning more, we're understanding, it's not about calorie counting, but this was set with that good intention, try to get people to eat less. And another reason I caution counting calories is there's no way that 2,000 calorie goal or any of these percent daily values can be set for everyone. It cannot be universal because every body is going to be different depending on your sex, your age, your career, your stress, your genetics. Like there's so many factors, and we all require different calories and nutrient levels and even where those come from. Some people can't process meats. Some people can't process dairy. So super important to understand or work with someone who knows your unique situation and your unique body. But it would be really hard to get all this information out there if that were the case. So they had to just pick a number, and 2,000 became it. All right, let's move on to the first of these percent daily values, and that is fats. At the top, we see total fat in bold. That doesn't really tell us a whole lot. So we are going to look down at the breakdown, the different fat types, because like calories, not all fats are created equal in the body. So the difference does matter. So right below that, we're going to see saturated fats. All labels do require saturated and trans fats to be listed. There are more types of fat than this. And as you can see, the numbers don't add up. We have 4.5 grams here, 0 grams here, but somehow we have 9 grams of fat. So where is the other coming from? Likely unsaturated fats. But then again, you don't know. Let's talk about these one by one. Saturated fats are listed first. These are the kinds that are solid at room temperature. Think about animal fats, coconut oil, and they've really been demonized in the US since we tend as a country to overconsume kind of poor quality animal products, but more so we overconsume these processed foods that are just laden with these saturated fats. They're added as emulsifiers, anti-foaming agents, And they're tricky because they don't just come up as saturated fat on the label. They could be listed as any number of things like palm oil, myristic acid, palmitic acid, stearic acid. If you really want to know what things mean, like the internet's a great place. You could print out a whole list of secret words for saturated fats, for sugars, for gluten. Like I highly suggest that if you are curious. So I mentioned unsaturated fats earlier. They are not required to be listed because they're considered generally healthier for us. Saturated fats are listed on the label because Americans tend to have a problem with their intake of saturated fats, not so much unsaturated. And these are the kind of fats that are liquid at room temp. Think about fish oils and plant oils. The only other fat you really need to be aware of is trans fat, listed right here, right below. And these are the bad fats. They are actually semi-solid at room temp and completely man-made. And they're created by bubbling hydrogen gas through a vat of oil, which gives us its name, hydrogenated oils. So hydrogenated oil, trans fat, same thing. Really interesting because the FDA has banned trans fat in the US since 2018. Yet we continue to see it on our labels. And it does make things appear healthier. So if you buy something that says 0 grams trans fat, in your head you're like, oh, that's super great. But true trans fat has been illegal for 6-7 years now. There are a lot of loopholes to getting around this though, and we'll go over a couple of those. One being, if there's less than 0.5 grams of trans fat or 0.5 grams of hydrogenated oil per serving, you can have it in your product and you do not legally have to list it as trans fat. So if you're reading your ingredients and you come across some sort of, say, hydrogenated soybean oil, but it says 0 grams trans fat, that's because it's less than what's legally required to be listed, but it's still in there. And while 0.5 grams a serving might not sound like a lot, Americans are eating many servings of many processed foods a day, and it is going to add up. Another loophole is using partially hydrogenated oils. So because they're not fully hydrogenated, they don't really count as, full trans fat. But here we see clearly on this label of croutons, the third ingredient, and we'll go over why that is also super important. That means there's a good amount in there. But 0 grams trans fat on the label, and on the front, they advertise 0 grams trans fat. So I still always look in the ingredients. I don't trust necessarily those claims. What about all the low fat, fat-free, no fat labels? This is a craze that kind of took off in the 70s and 80s. It's also good to look out for these labels because think about it. If we take away fat and we have something that's fat-free, but it doesn't taste like it's fat-free, then there's something really artificial going on there, right? We have to replace somehow that flavor and that texture that fat provided with who knows what. It could be added chemicals, sugars, carbs, etc. So a rule of thumb you're going to see here is if we take something away, it doesn't necessarily make it better because we're going to have to replace it with something else. Below fats, we get into our cholesterol. Like fat, it's gotten a really bad rap in the US, and few of us understand it, myself included, up until I started this journey. It's interesting to know that you do actually need cholesterol, and your body makes it. Honestly, all of these ingredients, all these nutrients are good for us. They are found in our bodies, they are natural. They become a problem when we are consuming them in excess. That could be the problem with anything, right? So cholesterol itself, we use it in creating sex hormones, producing bile, in our cell membranes, all these things, and our livers are actually producing it. So we're not just getting our cholesterol straight from our diet. We're going to make it no matter what. It's been long believed that cholesterol and heart disease are highly linked. And the truth is, and it's interesting because not a lot of people talk about this, is that there is not a lot of conclusive data to support this. And in fact, 50% of people with cardiovascular disease don't have high cholesterol levels at all. So there's no link in the meta-studies or study of many studies between this dietary cholesterol and risk of heart disease. And the problem with cholesterol levels is actually not the cholesterol itself, but our lipoproteins. These are the things that transport cholesterol around our bloodstream, the various parts of our body that need it. These lipoproteins they're pretty big. If you've ever had your blood drawn, you've probably seen these levels, shortened terms like HDL, LDL, VLDL. So what are those? Those are not cholesterol itself, even though we use the terms interchangeably. It gets very confusing, but these proteins, think of them like big globules. The lower the density, meaning the bigger the protein is, the bigger chance there is, or greater chance of it blocking up your artery. So the high density ones are smaller. They consider that the good cholesterol, and the VLDL, very low density, are really big. And those are the ones that are more apt to build up and clog and create plaque in your arteries. They are trying to just transport cholesterol, just do their job. But when there's too many and there's too low a density, that's when it becomes a problem. Going back to carbs, I hate to do this, but they do play a role here. Because that extra sugar we eat, if it can't be stored or it can't be used as energy, it can be turned into these VLDLs, these dangerous big lipoproteins. And as our consumption of processed foods that are really high in carbs increases, we've seen heart issues also increase. And we blame it a lot on things like fat and cholesterol. But in truth, we're not really looking at carbs closely enough. And that is where a lot of our issues are actually coming from. So if cholesterol is not as bad as we thought it was, at least dietary cholesterol, why is it still included on labels? Well, new research is constantly coming out, especially nutrition. It's a super evolving, super progressive field. The food industry, think about it, they're so giant. They're so widespread. Universities are teaching our doctor. They're running on this age-old tradition, this antiquated information, and it takes a long time for new findings to become popular opinion and incorporated. So we're lagging a little bit behind the research, and that's okay. That's why I empower each and every one of you to look into things on your own as well. Below cholesterol, we have our sodium, which is another American obsession. This came about the same time as the low-fat craze, the 70s. This happened when we removed all those fats, we talked about. We had to replace some of that salt because fat meat, it's naturally salty. We lost all that flavor, so we started replacing it with this sodium chloride to preserve the palatability. And like cholesterol, sodium is actually good. It's a vital nutrient. We need it. It's an electrolyte. Electrolytes, what they do is they preserve homeostasis in terms of water balance in your body between your cells and your bloodstream. I'm not saying sodium is entirely good because, again, everything in excess is going to be bad. So if we consume too much sodium, it's going to draw water into our bloodstream, which increases our blood pressure, and it's going to put more water in our tissues. You might get bloated, ankles might swell up a little bit, your water weight will increase. This is bad for your heart. This puts strain on your circulatory system. So too much sodium, yes, it is bad. And that's why it's on a label, because Americans, we really, really like our salt. And we tend to overconsume it because we eat a lot of processed foods that have this added salt in it. Another part of the problem with sodium is actually how we process it. So if you think about a multivitamin and you look on the back and you're like, oh my gosh, 10,000% my vitamin B12, 7,000% B3, like you're not actually absorbing 10,000% of those water-soluble vitamins. Our bodies are not super efficient in absorbing everything, and a lot of that is just going to get excreted in our urine, unfortunately. But sodium is a little different. We are very efficient with sodium. We're going to absorb about 100% of what we consume. So not only is it in more foods, but we're better at utilizing it. So it's like a double whammy. Sodium isn't as much a concern on a more whole food diet, but the levels are going to be high in some processed foods, especially think about your canned foods, cold cuts, soups, condiments, things like that. Just to clarify, because I was kind of confused, sodium and salt, they are not the same thing. Salt that comes from the earth has all these other minerals in it, super good stuff, micronutrients that we do need. We created table salt by refining that to just sodium and chloride to make it pure and finer and that crystal white that we see. If you're looking for a healthier way to go about cutting down sodium, you can buy low sodium or sodium-free versions and then add in your own and use your good healthy salt that's got some other minerals and stuff in it. So let's get into carbs next. Carbohydrates are simply a diverse group of energy sources. They are often overconsumed on our standard American diet, but we still need them in order to function. We need glucose. We need those glycogen reserves. And we think a lot of times about pastas, pizza, cookies, things like that when we hear carbs, but it's important to know that they're in, healthy natural grains. They're very prevalent in dairy, in fruit, and things like that. So it's not just our processed foods. They are also found in some natural foods. So if we look on our label under carbohydrates, the first thing we see is in bold, the total carbs. And kind of like fats, this doesn't really tell us a whole lot, right? It's just giving us a base number to go off. We're going to look below at the types of carbohydrates because that is what matters. That's what's most important. So the two that are listed, these are required to be listed. There might be more. There might be different types of carbs in addition, but in minimum, these will be on there. We have dietary fiber and total sugars with a subset of added sugars. We'll get into the difference of the two, but these are required to be listed because most Americans on the SAD diet are deficient in fiber and consume excess sugar. They're on there for completely opposite reasons. Let's go over each individually, starting with dietary fiber. These are kind of the good carbs. They are found naturally in grains and actually a lot in fruit. And we don't digest fiber, which is kind of cool and actually why it's so good for us. We need it. We need it to give bulk and movement to our GI tract and to our waist, kind of keep things moving. If you've been constipated ever, you might hear, you need to eat more fiber. On the flip side, if you consume too much fiber, it's going to do the opposite effect. So everything in moderation, but it is very beneficial. And because we don't digest it, at least in soluble fiber, it makes it all the way to our colon. And that means our microbiome gets to eat it. They get a little snack. And a happy microbiome is a happy us. So super awesome. Fiber is awesome. And then we get into sugar. And sugars provide that short little energy burst, but not really anything else. So when we talked about empty calories before, if there are a lot of carbs and not much else, that's going to probably contribute directly to your calorie count, and you're just getting that short burst of energy, and then you're like, done. Just remember, if you cannot use energy, it is going to be stored, and sugar is going to be stored as fat most of the time. If you're trying to lose weight or be conscious of this, carbs is somewhere, especially a diet that sugar is something I would look for. And it's tricky. You can see the amount of sugar on here, but if you were to look at the ingredient list, and we'll get into ingredient lists in a bit, but sugar has a lot of names. It's not always going to be listed as just sugar. Things like sucrose, fructose, dextrin, malt. There's so many. You can find a list online. I can send you a list of secret hidden names for sugar if you'd like, but it's got a lot of different names. So what is added sugar then? And what's the difference between total sugar? So we see on this label 6 grams of total sugar, but none of the added. Added sugar is exactly what it sounds like. We're adding sugar from an outside source that's not naturally found in that product. And it could be in any sort of form. It might not just be table sugar. It could be chemically made. So that means we can do the math here. We're going to assume that 6 grams of sugars comes then naturally from this product. So a good example is like a fruit juice, not from concentrate, right? It might advertise no added sugars. And we think, oh, that's great. But if you look at the label, it probably, my guess is it has a ton of just total sugar, because there is a lot of fructose, is fruit sugar, naturally found in that food. And same with dairy. This sugar can be pretty high because there's a lot of lactose, which is our milk sugar, that are found in milk products. So just because it's a natural sugar doesn't make it any better than added sugar. Your body still processes it the same, depending on the source at least. So it's important to know that these are both not super great. So what about if we see sugar-free, low carb, no added sugar, labels like this? What does that mean? Yes, they do have less sugar comparably to something else that they're comparing it to. But keep in mind, if we take something away, and now we're seeing this as a recurring theme, right? If we take that sugar away and we're eating it and it doesn't taste like there's no sugar in it, that means something else was added. And you can often bet that it is artificial. So there are a couple different things companies might use, and artificial sweeteners has become really prevalent, since that 70s, 80s boom as well. And it comes in a couple different forms. Popular ones are like saccharin, which is in Sweet and Low, aspartame, which is in Equal, sucralose, which is in Splenda. And I'm not here to say you should or shouldn't use them. I don't think there's quite enough data on these long-term being consumed, the side effects, but there is evidence that erythritol, which is a sugar alcohol often found in these artificial sweeteners, it is linked to heart issues. So while you might be avoiding sugar, those bad side effects, you are risking the other side effects that come with these artificial sweeteners. What about more natural sweeteners like honey and agave? Those are better, but there are also natural sweeteners like monk fruit and stevia that, yeah, they come from plants, but they're not considered as natural. So what's the problem with these? So like the artificial sweeteners, even monk fruit and stevia, these sugars, they are not naturally sweet. They're excessively sweet. In fact, some of them are 200 to 700 times sweeter than our table sugar and what we're used to in nature. That's a crazy number. And so what happens with that? Over time, your taste buds are going to adapt to that if you consume them on a regular basis. And over time, you're going to start craving more sugary things. And if you start to eat, try to go back to natural foods that have natural sugar, like fruit, it's not going to taste very sweet to you because your taste buds have gotten so used to these hyper sweetened alternatives. So that's just something to keep in mind if you are trying to go sugar-free, low carb, and no added sugar. It sounds super great on the label, but there are always a give and take. So just please be aware of that.
Go over protein next, which is the final macronutrient in our top little section here. And you'll see it listed right there. This is the one area it's included because it's one of the main components of energy sources, but Americans do not in general have a hard time reaching the amount of protein that we need for the day. We might not get the best quality protein, but in terms of flat grams, we're pretty good at reaching it, if not too good. Way more than most other countries. There's a lot more I could get into about protein. We could talk about all the different amino acids. It's not just protein is protein. It's broken down to a bunch of different kinds, and they are the building blocks of our body. So it's super important to be getting enough protein to build muscle to help support other functions that are going on. For the sake of time, I am not going to get into that right now. Just know that it's very important, and the quality is also super important. That we will touch on a little bit later, but in terms of protein, not going to go into it as much detail as I did the other macronutrients. The next topic we're going to cover are vitamins and minerals, and they are going to be found in the little section right below all the macronutrients we just covered. They're considered micronutrients, meaning we do need them. And there's quite an array of minerals and vitamins that we need, but we need them in much smaller amounts. On a label, there can be a lot listed. You might see some protein powders or something health foody that has a ton of minerals and vitamins listed, but there are only 4 that are required to be on all food packaging. And those are the 4 right here. They are in this order: vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. So you may see more or other kinds, but in the very least, you will see these 4, and that is because most Americans are deficient in these 4. We're going to go over each one really briefly, just so you know why they're on there and what they're actually doing, why we need them. So let's start with the very first one. That is vitamin D. Vitamin D is actually a hormone, and it's something that our bodies produce. There's a lot of different versions of it, but D3 is the type that, with sunshine as the catalyst, we can produce on our own, or we can consume it through some animal products. D2 is a version that's found in plants, but it's generally harder for our bodies to utilize. The reason most Americans are deficient in vitamin D is because we don't get enough sunshine. We wear clothes, long sleeves, hats, sunscreen, all this stuff that's kind of blocking that, which I'm not saying that's bad or good, but it's important to take a supplement. I even take a vitamin D supplement because I know I'm not getting enough sunlight every day. Our second on the list of vitamins and minerals is going to be calcium, and this is the most plentiful mineral in our entire bodies, and it's an electrolyte, and we need it to survive. The problem is, and the reason why most Americans on the standard American diet are deficient, is because its absorption rate is affected by a lot of things. High levels of stress and diets that are high in salt, sugar, fat, and phosphorus, which is basically the standard American diet in a nutshell, those 2 things right there are going to slow dramatically your absorption rate of calcium. So you might be drinking all the milk in the world, but if you're stressed all the time and you're not eating very good, it's not doing your body much good. And that's why it's included on our labels. The third one to cover is iron, which is in all cells, oxygenates our blood, super important. You find it more in animal products, but it's still very prevalent, especially in vegetables and non-animal foods. Women, younger women, menstruating women are more deficient. You can become anemic, meaning lack of iron. I've been through that. It's terrible. You feel awful, but super important that we're getting enough, not too much. A lot of these things too, you got to be careful that you're not going the other end of the spectrum, but make sure you get enough iron for your body, for your needs every day. Fourth one is potassium, and this is also an electrolyte, and this one works with sodium. So these 2 work in tandem, and the body has this ideal ratio of potassium to sodium that it would like to have, and unfortunately on the standard American diet, that is swapped. So while ideally we would have more potassium to sodium, the average American very much so has more sodium to potassium. So that's another reason why it is listed on our food labels. What about fortified foods? If you've seen that label, especially milk, it's often fortified with vitamin D or calcium, and that's adding things in. First of all, that should be a red flag that if you have to add nutrients in, why do we have to do that? Where is the natural nutrients in the first place? So I always kind of question that a little bit. Another problem is we don't know the sources. Some of these vitamins that are added back in or minerals might be from a laboratory. We don't really know. We can try to look at the ingredient list and figure it out, but sometimes it's your best guess. I'm not trying to completely bag on fortified foods. If you have limited options, can't really get access to whole foods as much, or just not in your budget, then Fortify is totally okay. Just understand that the bioavailability, meaning the amount that your body is able to digest and absorb the vitamins in there, is going to be a lot less than the natural food in the natural form it comes in. I think I'm going to do a future seminar on vitamins because it's very complicated. And nature does an amazing job of packaging them exactly as we need them with the things we need. Like D3, you need to have K2 and a little bit of fat in order to really properly use and absorb it. Just taking D3 on its own, not going to be super helpful. So, not trying to freak everyone out, just be aware that it's a little more complicated than exactly the labels say they are.
Yay, we've made it completely through the actual nutrition label part, so we are going to move on to the ingredient list. And I won't be going over specific ingredients like all the color dyes and natural flavors and things that I could go on and on about. We're just going to look at them as a whole, some tricks for at a glance discovering some red flags, what might be good, what you might need to look out for, things like that. As we get into our ingredients, know that the order does matter. And on the right, I have an example of 2 energy bars. This is an RX bar, and this is surprisingly a Cocoa Puffs cereal bar. And so we're going to compare these two as we talk about ingredients. But the order is really going to matter. Ingredients are required to be listed in the descending order by their weight. So meaning the higher up they're on that ingredient list, the more of that ingredient is in the product. This is super important. So if you don't have a lot of time or at a quick glance you're trying to understand, is this food going to provide me with anything good? I look at the top 3 because that's going to make up the bulk of that product. There might be a lot of other stuff in there in small amounts, but let's look at this RX bar, for example. Top 3 ingredients: almonds, egg whites, dates. That's pretty dang good. Your body's getting a lot of usable stuff out of there. And if we compare it to the Cocoa Puffs one, first ingredient, cereal, which is whole grain corn. So carbs, sugar, carbs, bad fats. Right off the bat, we see most of this product is not going to be providing our body with very much except those empty calories. Ingredient lists can be a little bit tricky because we see that these ingredients are in here, right? But it doesn't say how much of each one. Again, we know the order, so we can compare by weight, but we don't truly know the exact amount. And it also kind of allows for tricky claims to be made, like made with whole grains, when in fact, a whole grain could be way down here on the list, ingredient number 8, and there could be hardly any of it in that product. But because it's in there, you can say, oh, made with whole grains, and it seems a lot healthier. A couple rules I use personally when I'm looking at ingredients or comparing 2 products. 1, the shorter the better. Obviously, this is a lot more appealing to me than this whole paragraph over here. Secondly, the pronunciation rule. If it's an ingredient that I can't pronounce out loud, let's say like just over here, mixed tocopherols, like I'm truly not sure if I'm saying that right. Probably not a natural thing. I don't know what that is, so it's a red flag to me. And then thirdly, the ancestor rule. If it's an ingredient that our ancestors would not be aware of, and I'm not talking about like caveman times, maybe even 50 years ago, then it's a red flag. So everything on here, I feel like our grandparents would know exactly what all that is. But if we go into here and start looking at all this stuff, malt extract, did they use that back then? Like, does anybody even know what that is? Exactly. So those are the kind of 3 little rules that I use. Another thing to keep in mind is that not everything legally has to be listed on a label, which is really frustrating to me. The FDA does set minimum requirements. If it's over, we talked about trans fat, over 0.5 grams per serving, you are required to list it. But this means if it's below these requirements, it could be in your product and you have no idea. So that means even things like trace amounts of toxic substances, animal feces, mold, not trying to gross you out. I'm just saying there's always a risk when we're eating out of a package as opposed to a raw food, a whole food, because there could be something else in there and we have no idea as consumers. Something that labels, on the flip hand, are really good about is listing the common allergens. And it is legally required for all labels to list any of the top 8 allergens if they are present. And that includes milk, eggs, shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, soybeans, and sesame. So if we look over here, and if you are allergic to something or worried about sensitivity, or someone like a child, for example, instead of reading this whole long paragraph, which might not be helpful anyways, because a lot of times these allergens are hidden or used with different words that might not be as obvious At the bottom of that, if there are any of those top 8, it will be in bold and in all caps and say contains, this one has milk, wheat, and soy. Makes it a lot easier than having to read the whole thing if you're just kind of looking for allergies. If you know someone or you yourself are extremely sensitive in terms of like anaphylactic shock type thing, if you're celiac, worried about cross-contamination, then you also might want to look out for below that. It might say something like over here, manufactured in a facility that also processes all of these allergens. So while this doesn't contain all those allergens, if you're worried about cross-contamination, you can look out for that all the same. Awesome. We are making such good progress. We are going to move on to our last section, which is about other wording and certifications you might see on the package. They could be on the front, on the back, little symbols, look like little stamps, claims. So we're going to go over I picked maybe like the top 5 related to health that we see the most. And I just want people to understand what it really means so that you're not wasting money buying something that looks healthier, or on the flip side, missing out on something that actually is a little bit better for you. So let's get started. All right, our first claim is going to be natural or all natural. Unless it's a meat product, which we'll talk about in a little bit. If a product or packaged food says natural, it doesn't mean a thing. That term is not regulated by the FDA or USDA for anything other than meat. So that's just a marketing ploy. Don't get fooled by it. This claim only has relevancy if it's applied to meat products. And a lot of times, especially bacon and cold cuts, things that are not really processed, but are processed to an extent, because it's not like you got that straight off the animal. A lot of times you will see, like over here, natural, 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 and it will always have this little asterisk. And somewhere on the package, there will be a disclaimer that says something like, contains no artificial flavors, colors, preservatives, sweeteners, or minimally processed. And that's what that means. It doesn't mean it's non-GMO, organic, or healthy, or anything else. It just means those exact things. Keep in mind, there are entire departments and teams devoted to researching what is appealing to us as consumers, from font to package color to the brand names, literally every little thing, down to these claims they throw out at you like natural. And so we tend to think subliminally, oh, that must be healthier. But unless it's meat, do not fall for it. All right, our second claim is going to be organic, which is really blowing up right now. Super excited to go over this. It simply refers to how a plant product is grown or how animals are raised. And we will go over how organic applies to each type of food because there are different regulations. If you see it for a processed food in general, meaning a food product that has multiple ingredients, it's not just a single food item, then to be called organic, certified organic, it has to have at least 95% of those ingredients be organic. So not 100%, but at least 95. If it is a plant, so produce, that is considered certified organic, there's a whole slew of things it has to meet. I'm just going to rattle them off real quick. They must be grown without use of pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, hormones, chemical fertilizers, sewage, sludge, GMOs, trans fats, synthetic, or toxic substances. Whew. And if it is an animal product, to be considered organic, it also has a whole unique list of things you got to meet, included no added hormones, no unapproved antibiotics, no genetic engineering, feeds must be 100% certified organic too, the land must be certified organic, and they must have year-round access to outdoor conditions. So you can see as we list all those, why there's such a big cost disparity between organic and non-organic food, or conventional food as we call it. You are paying more for organic food because you're paying for these more expensive ways to raise or grow that food. It's a lot cheaper, believe me, to just spray chemicals and use conventional feeds and use the cheaper grosser feeds. So yes, it costs more, but do understand that that value is coming from somewhere. While we just covered organic does mean better farming practices and healthier in certain aspects, it doesn't mean nutritionally healthier. If I give you organic sugar, it's still sugar after all, right? Like, let's not kid ourselves. It's not just suddenly healthier for your body and weight loss because it's organic, right? So don't let that fool you. The USDA does have really high standards for what's considered certified organic. So I always look for this seal if I am trying to buy organic. All right, and our third claim is non-GMO, which stands for genetically modified organism. You might also see it on your package as a bioengineered product. So this is what that means. If we are talking about this as related to food, it means at some point the DNA was artificially altered by humans. Either we added, deleted, or mutated the genes. And yeah, I know that you can consider selective breeding to be, gene interference if I breed a certain bull with a certain cow because I like their characteristics and I naturally let them breed. But in this instance, when we're talking about non-GMOs on food, we specifically mean direct gene alteration. All right. Now, I can't be too critical of GMOs because they were founded with really good intention. And to be honest, we might be in a really tough spot without them. With our growing worldwide population, it's hard to grow enough food on the limited amount of land we have available for growing food. So GMOs kind of help solve that problem a little bit by getting more food and more access to people like in third world countries who might not be able to get that food. So I'm not here playing devil's advocate both sides. There was a good purpose and a good intent. They did come about for multiple reasons. So one of those is enhancing natural characteristics of food. Like this strawberry, you can make them grow faster, make them grow bigger, get more out of it as compared to this organic one. It also allows for crops to be more hardy when you're growing. They're more pest resistant or weed resistant. And in transport or storage, like this apple, this one is going to last a lot longer. You can ship it a lot farther, people more access to it than this non-GMO apple over here. And it's funny to think about because a lot of people might shiver when they think about GMOs. But like I said, this is also a natural process that's happening. Farmers, even way, way back in the day, we started breeding things to get more desirable characteristics. Like look at this banana down here. This is how bananas used to look like. But through selective breeding, we get the banana that we know today. So in terms of the health impact of GMOs, we don't really know the long-term ramifications of eating them yet or a diet high in GMOs. So that's, I tell people, a personal decision you must make as a consumer. I am wary of things that don't have enough length or time or data to know the conclusive evidence. And yeah, it might be totally fine, but if I don't know, that is a red flag to me. If you are trying to eat non-GMO, this is the label you want to look for. It means it's been certified. If something is certified organic, it's going to automatically be GMO free. But if it is non-GMO, that does not automatically mean that it is organic, nor does it mean it's healthy or good for you or anything else, just that it was not altered on a genetic level. All right, we're getting there. The next claim we're going to look at is hormone and antibiotic free, and this has to do with meat products. So we're going to break them down by animal species. First, let's look at dairy products. A lot of times we see, oh, these cows are not treated with RBST on the label, although few of us know what RBST is or what it does. So this is a synthetic growth hormone that mimics what a cow will naturally produce when she's producing milk. We just add a little bit more of it to increase further that milk production. It's actually illegal in the EU, Canada, and most countries, but is still legal in the United States. Companies are not required to label the use of hormones in their products, but they will a lot of times add claims like this if they don't include it because to consumer, that is more appealing. And in terms of RBST, these studies, again, are inconclusive. Most of them show, honestly, little to no adverse side effects on humans who consume RBST milk as opposed to that without it. The problem is with the cows that are injected with RBST. There are significant side effects. And so if you're worried about the humaneness of that, that's a concern. But also if those animals are suffering from this added hormone and I'm going to eat that animal or that animal's byproduct, that's concerning for me as well. So that is something that I do look out for in my milk, cheese, dairy products and such. What about poultry? This one's easy. You do not need to worry about poultry products as much, and here's why. So it is actually illegal to give chickens hormones in the United States. So if you see hormone-free chicken or something, it's like, yeah, well, duh. It's kind of just like a marketing ploy to make things look better. And in terms of eggs, farmers don't use antibiotics very often because it will reduce the egg production and they're trying to maximize that production. So luckily, they tend to stay away from that. And finally, let's look at beef really quick. Cattle that are treated with hormones are going to be regularly tested by the USDA and when they're slaughtered and that meat is packaged, just to make sure that the estrogenic activity, meaning the amount of hormone activity in that meat consumed, is very small. And if you compare the two, the levels of hormones are not that much different in comparison with the hormone-free beef. But again, that is a consumer decision that you need to make. If you do want to steer clear of hormones, you can look for no added hormones, raised without additional hormones. These claims are regulated by the USDA. To be able to be on the package, they have to comply. And so there are regulations for this. This is our second to last claim, and we're going to go over free range and grass-fed. Again, regarding animal products and byproducts, and we'll go down through the animal species as well real quick. So with poultry, a couple things. If it says cage-free, all this means is that birds have freedom to roam indoors with unlimited access to feed and water. It does not mean they get any outdoor time. It does not mean they get a lot of space. They're just not technically in a cage. They're all bunched in one room together. So I, for the longest time, thought this sounded really good until I learned what it means. A step up from that is free range, which is essentially the same as cage-free, but at certain times of the day, they get access to like an outdoor lot. It might not even be dirt or natural ground or that much room, but that is a step up, and they consider that free range. And I didn't include it on here, but we're starting to see pasture-raised, and that is becoming a lot more common, especially with eggs. And I was like, what does that mean? What's pasture-raised? So this is a newer claim, and as of right now, while the USDA does regulate cage-free and free range in terms of, getting to use that, there is no regulation for pasture-raised. Anyone can claim pasture-raised as of now. But if you do your research, you discover a company truly is, that means they likely have access to outdoors a lot more than free range. And we're talking real dirt. So they get to forage and be on natural ground and have a little bit more space and air than free range. So that is kind of what I try to look for. We're talking about beef. Do you see the claim free range beef? This also makes me giggle. I went to college for animal science and animal production, and I also cowboyed. And so it was very obvious to me, even before I went into nutrition, that all beef cattle are bred, born, raised in what we consider a free range environment. So if you see this claim, it doesn't mean that much, because all beef cattle at some point in their life have been on grass or in that type of situation. Most of them are finished, which means before you slaughter them, they go to a feedlot and they're fed grain. And depending on if it's going to be organic and whatnot, what that grain is differs. So they're trying to get more weight, more marbling, more fatty tissue on that. And if you've ever had 100% grass-fed beef, you notice there is a difference in taste and marbling and leanness. So if you are trying to avoid any of that grain-fed finishing, you want to look for the claims 100% pasture-raised or 100% grass or pasture finished, because that means that beef cattle was on grass its entire life. So it is truly 100% free range. And finally, with dairy, to find cows that are free range in terms of milk, cheese, and other products, this is a little bit harder because dairy cows need to be milked twice a day and they need a much higher energy-rich diet. So they ought to be eating stuff constantly. You can find some companies that allow them access to outdoors certain times of days, but this is a little bit harder to find. And so our final claim is gluten-free. Now, I included this because gluten seems to be a buzzword that's taken off, and you're starting to see gluten-free alternatives and gluten-free sections in grocery stores. And unless you've encountered an issue with gluten, you might have no idea what this is or what it even means. So in short, gluten is the protein found in wheat, barley, rye, and a couple other grains of the sort that is responsible for that fluffy, sticky, beautiful nature that you get during baking, where things rise and they get airy and delicious. I call it the delicious protein. If you've ever had a gluten-free, like a brownie alternative, it is not the same. Boy, I could do a whole other seminar on going gluten-free and why it's causing so many issues in America. But in short, we're starting to see this increasing amount of our population have this sensitivity to gluten. There's around 30% of the population now, and it's on this range. You might be at one end of the spectrum where you don't even notice the side effects at all, or you might be on the other end and you have full-blown celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease. And some people might just assume gluten is wheat, wheat is gluten, but this protein has a lot of other secret names. So if you're trying to stay away from it, like sugar, I would print out a list of them online, or I can provide one for you because it is a little tricky thing. It's in everything. Gluten-free does not equal healthy. A lot of times packages might put that on there, even if they're naturally gluten-free. I see gluten-free on things like cheese and fruit that even in the wild natural form would never have gluten in them. So I think it's kind of funny, but people assume, oh, it's got to be healthier, but not necessarily. So we think about it. If I give you a gluten-free cookie, that's going to be just as bad as a gluten-full cookie. And honestly, it could be a little bit worse. So remember our theme, if you take something out, you got to put something back in. So if we remove gluten, this protein that makes things delicious and fluffy and how we know them, and we're trying to mimic that without using gluten, we're going to add stuff back in. And often this means adding extra sugars and fats to compensate for losing all that texture and flavor in baking. If you are trying to go gluten-free, there's a bunch of labels out there you can look for. Looking for these will save you time of having to read the ingredient label for sure to trying to figure out if there's gluten in there. All right, so those are all the claims I'm going to go over. Just know that this is a small handful, and I picked some random other ones, but there are so many claims out there and certifications, it's almost overwhelming. So I went over the ones most prevalent to health, but if you have a cause that's important to you, do the research, look for those labels, figure out what they are. And finally, just to wrap things up, we're going to go over just maybe 8 or so tricks on how to tackle the food labels and how to make this whole thing a little bit easier, because I just spit out a lot. So what are some actionable things that we can do right now to start heading in the right direction? Number 1, first thing we can do, don't go grocery shopping while you're hungry. You may have already heard this. There have been so many studies done that you are more likely to buy unhealthy food or foods that are not as good for you, higher in sugar, when you're hungry, because your body's craving that short, easily accessible energy burst. All right, have a plan, especially if you're trying to skim food labels. This is not going to go over very well. And next, I know this might be obvious, but the easiest way to read food labels is to try to avoid them as much as possible, aiming for wholer foods, fresher foods. And a trick I like to use, and you'll notice this now or start to, pretty much all grocery stores are laid out the same. If you stick to the perimeter of the store, that's where all your fresh, more whole products are going to be. So think about the edge of a store when you go in somewhere. You got meats, you got fruits, you got veggies, dairy products, fresh bread. Yeah, some of them might be packaged or slightly processed, but in general, they're closer to their natural form. The middle of the store, on all those shelves, that's where you get your frozen food, your packaged food, your canned food, things like that. So I will do a lap on the outside first and try to get as much of my stuff as I can from the perimeter of a store. If Whole Foods sound super awesome, but you're like me and you really don't have time or patience or a passion to cook, which is unfortunate for me, and that's also a reason why processed foods are so appealing to us, right? My advice is to try a meal prep book. And I'm sure you've heard of meal prep and it sounds like a lot of work, but I promise you this changed my life. You buy one and I can offer suggestions for ones I use. If you need help, just reach out anytime. And it will tell you literally for each week, give you a shopping list, exactly what to buy and exact amounts, and then 3 or 4 recipes for that week. And you can shop one day, cook everything and freeze it, and then you don't really have to cook the rest of the week at all. It's amazing. If you don't want to meal prep, at least go shopping with a plan, have a list, or you're going to just walk out of a store with all this stuff you really didn't need. Costco, oh my gosh, notorious for this, right? Something else you can do is use an app that scans barcodes. I use Yuka. There's a free and a paid version. I use the paid version. It's super cheap. You can go into a store, scan a barcode on a food, and it will bring up the nutrition label for you. So if you forget your glasses or have a hard time reading all that little stuff, it will bring it up for you to read and evaluate. And I do caution on these because some of them will rate the health level of the food on a scale. And some of that information might be a little bit antiquated, like the whole cholesterol thing we were talking about earlier. It might flag it as unhealthy if it thinks the cholesterol levels are too high. So I kind of ignore that part. But for reading labels, this is a lot better. And it also is great for beauty products. It'll pull up any toxic ingredients. This is a silly one, but I had a lot of fun with it. And it's just try new things. If you're not used to cooking or eating whole foods and are gotten used to the same things, try exploring stuff. It's really fun. I made a rule where every week I go shopping, I buy one weird thing, like one tropical fruit I've never tried, one type of cheese from Europe I haven't tried, like something cool. Make it interesting. Broaden your horizon of what food could be and how good natural foods are. Take a cooking class, learn how to use them, all this stuff. There's so many cool things out there to learn. And then the excuse I get a lot is, well, that sounds great. I want to cook. I have time to. I know how to. I like to do it, but I can't afford to buy organic and to buy a Whole Foods even. I can't go into, my rebuttal on that right now, but I will be doing a future seminar on how to eat healthier or just be healthier in general without it costing more. So stay tuned for that. be a couple months out from here, but I do plan to cover that. So there are no excuses. And finally, practice, 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 like with anything, right? It's a lot harder to practice in a store if you don't have a lot of time, you're getting frustrated or embarrassed. Just start in your kitchen cupboard right now. Just kind of look over things, get used to finding where things are at a glance. And I tell you, when I first was going through my health issues, and one of the things they told me is you can't eat gluten. First of all, I had to Google what gluten was. I had no idea. Secondly, I had to learn how to read a food label. This is, a long time ago, but at that time, I had no idea. I never looked at labels, to be honest. And so my shopping experiences suddenly became really depressing and frustrating because I would go out to stores and I would spend an hour and a half comparing all these different things, trying to figure out, oh my gosh, especially soy sauce and teriyaki sauce. Really, really frustrating. All the condiments I learned have wheat in them. And I was like, why is this? Why does America have to be like this? Over time, I got really good at reading labels and understand what I was reading. And now it takes me no time in a store at all. But at first, it was infuriating. So don't worry, totally normal. It will get easier. That was a lot. And if you've made it this far, I really appreciate you, not only for being here, but just for showing up for yourself, for being open to education and awareness, because that is the best thing we can do for ourselves. The greatest investment we can make is in our own knowledge. It's not in real estate, it's not in Bitcoin, but in what we know and what we can make actionable. So thank you guys so much for listening. I know we talked about a lot. So if you have more detailed questions on something we covered or something entirely different, please feel free to reach out to me. This is all my contact information. If you would like personalized help, I do one-on-one coaching. I also do small groups, which are really awesome if you might not want to pay for private coaching, or you're just getting into the health field or have been trying for a while, not really sure where you're going or where to start. I do 12-week group coaching, small groups, and this can be in person or online. And we go over everything in our lives, from toxic relationships to what you're eating to how you're sleeping. How is your mental state affecting you? I mean, everything. So it's a really, really great place to start. But reach out to me, let me know. Would love to have you join one of our groups. I also do a lot of private speaking contracts. So if you have a business you work for, or even just a friend group, and you guys are like, oh, wow, I really would love to learn about, menopause or exercise or something like that, let me know. And I can come give you information, give you talk on that specific topic. So I will keep doing these seminars monthly, free, and posting them. And I think next month, February, we're going to do something about sleep, because good sleep seems to evade pretty much everyone I know. So keep an eye out for that. I post dates on Facebook and the website. Thank you guys so much again. I hope you have a wonderful month. Go to your food pantry, start practicing reading your foods, and may God bless you and your health journey.